Hi, I'm Chad with Move for Guitar. This lesson is from our series How to Read Music for Guitar. In this lesson, I'm going to explain rests. First off, if you like all the diagrams for this series, including the diagrams for this lesson, you can download our free e-guide, How to Read Music for Guitar. But I am working on it right now as I'm filming this lesson, so it might not be available as you're watching this lesson. If it is available, a link will pop up on the screen that'll allow you to download it. And like I said, it's free, so there's no reason not to download it when it is available. This is part 10 from our series, How to Read Music for Guitar. If you'd like to go back and start at the beginning, you can click the link on the screen. So up to this point, we've only talked about notes. We've talked about notes that you would play. So if you're playing your guitar, you would pluck these notes, you'd fret them, and you'd have these notes ring out. And I talked about different note values, which are on your screen right now, which are the most common note values you're going to run across. But we haven't talked about something called rests. And rest creates space in your music, because in music you don't want to play constant notes. You need space in between notes where you're not playing anything, because that adds more interest and it gives your ears a break. If you just constantly play notes the whole time, that gets really tiring and really obvious really quick. There are times in music where that's appropriate, but for majority of music you're going to find a lot of rests. And for every note value, there's a rest symbol that has the same value. So for the whole note, you have a whole note rest or a whole rest. So you can think of it as one, just like the whole note. So that would mean if you came across this, you would not play a note for as long as if you were playing a note, you would play this. And there is a little bit of difference between the whole note rest and the whole note. There are times when it can actually be a different value, which I'll talk about at the very end. The rest of them, it doesn't work that way, but the whole note rest does have a special situation, which I'll talk about at the end of this lesson. But the whole note rest, it just looks like this rectangle right here. And really what it is, it's a rectangle with a little line like that, and it's hanging from this line right here, which is your fourth line. So your whole note rest looks like this, and it hangs from your fourth line. Your half note rest has the same value as a half note, so instead of playing a note for the duration of what a half note would be, you wouldn't play anything for that duration. And the half note rest looks pretty much the same as a whole note rest, except that it's flipped around like this, and it's resting on top of the third line. So the whole note is hanging from the fourth line. The half note rest is sitting on top of the third line. So those two can be confusing if you don't memorize which one is which. So it's really important to understand that the whole note rest hangs from the fourth line. The half note rest is sitting on top of the third line. And just like with these note durations, a half note rest is half the value of a whole note rest. Then your next one is a quarter note rest. It looks like this. It's a pretty obvious one. It's really easy to recognize. It's very distinguished from all the others. So if you come across this in music, you don't play a note for the same duration that you would have played this quarter note. The eighth note rest looks like this. Again, that would be not playing a note for the same duration you would have played this note. And your 16th note rest looks like this, which is similar to the eighth note rest, except it's added on another one of these things on the end that hang off to the left side. And you can see it's longer because of that. And also that it's all the way down to the first line. The eighth note is on the second line. So that's how you can distinguish these two quickly. But again, these could be a little confusing if you're not used to looking at rests. And just think about it as this one has one of these things, and that's because an eighth note has one flag. This has two of them, and that's because the 16th note has two flags. So that's how you can distinguish them. And then I said there's one rest that is a little bit different, where it doesn't always equal the same value as a whole note. A whole note rest doesn't always equal the same value as a whole note. And we'll talk more about this later, but that's because a whole note rest usually spans what's called a whole bar or a measure. And it doesn't matter the time signature, which all this we're going to talk about coming up, so don't worry if you're confused. A whole note, it does matter the time signature. So if this wasn't in common time, it might be one that you don't even use, or it might not span the whole bar. But we'll talk about this later, but just understand that the whole note rest can be a little different value than the whole note, but in common time, they're the same value. So that's an explanation of rest. Go ahead and move on to the next lesson where I'm going to explain bar lines and bars are also known as measures, which we'll talk about. And be sure to download the e-guide. All the diagrams are in there, and be sure to subscribe because we had at least one new lesson every day.